All right, Yins, welcome back to another episode of Horror Joy Meet Your Maker. Today, you just have me, Jeff, and I am so excited to be joined by Jane Flett. Jane is a Scottish writer who lives in Berlin. Her debut novel, Freakslaw, which is awesome, is available from Doubleday in the UK and Zando in the US. And she has a forthcoming novel called Welcome to the Chaos Comp that we might get into a little bit. But for now, Jane, thank you for joining us. Welcome to Horror Joy. I'm going to open with our customary question, which is the premise of this podcast, the relationship between horror and joy. And how do you find the relationship between horror and joy?
First, I want to say I love this question because I love joy and I love horror. And yeah, thinking about how they come together gave me a lot of pleasure bringing this. So yeah, one of the things I was thinking, I was actually doing a workshop on fear play a little while ago and like why people love fear. And we looked into this a little bit of the three different kinds of people who get excited by fear or different ways that you enjoy fear. One being adrenaline junkies, like people who just genuinely love the experience of being terrified. One that the researchers called like white knucklers, like people who hate the experience of it, but really like enjoy the feeling that they've gone through something terrifying and got out the other side. And then they had another genre of like dark copers, so people who use horror or use fear as a way to process their traumas, to like go to a dark place to get into that. And I find this so interesting as a framework to talk about it because I think for me, I am really on the adrenaline junkie. Like for me, just horror and fear, the experience of it is deeply pleasurable. I enjoy the feeling in my body, in my brain of being afraid, and that kind of activating excitement is really fun. But I think the others are also really valid in this way that horror can allow us the sense of enduring something, especially if we endure it as a group with other people, have that experience come together, and also this kind of safe way of accessing these, darker emotions, maybe sitting with them. But looking inside my own brain, I don't think that's what I'm doing. I think I'm just having so much fun.
That's great. I love this concept of dark knuckler. That is, that's a bit much, isn't it? With everything going on in the world right now.
Yeah, we're living through the horror simulation a little bit.
Yeah. So, if you could tell us a little bit about your origin story, how did Jane Flett become a writer?
I think that writing has always been something I've been really excited by ever since I was little. I was always telling stories. And yeah, I was thinking about this. I actually, when I was younger at school, we had this class at one point where we had to make our own little books. And I remember designing my own press as a maybe 8-year-old or whatever, that was called Panda Press. Had little pictures of a panda on the back, I guess black and white animal like penguin, being really original and inspired. Yeah, when my parents moved house a little while ago and they were clearing out their house and found all of these books that I had made that had my little biography on the back and publishing in Panda Press. So I found one that the first story that I wrote for that, which is just a bunch of A4 sheets of paper stapled together with things written in it, was a haunted house story, was a guy goes into a haunted house and does it. So yeah, I feel the desire for that was always there and just became more over time.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, I want to actually ask you a question about haunted houses because we have just completed a series on the podcast, or are in the midst of completing a series on the podcast on haunted houses. The the pièce de résistance, if you will, is going to be a discussion of Mark Danielewski's House of Leaves, because we're trying to figure out what the heck to do with haunted houses or sentient houses. So I'm curious, just to get, since you brought it up, I'm going to ask you for what is your take on haunted houses? Like, where does this fit in this love of horror for people? Why are we so fascinated with houses and them being haunted?
What a great question. I think all the most scary things for me are when you get into spaces that you can't escape. And a lot of sort of horror things, if you can run away from the bad guy, you can get to another place. But inside, if the bad thing is inside the house or is the house itself, there's that sense of this is the safe place. This is where I come to ground myself and feel safe from things. And that is where the worst horror things live. So I really love that. And I think there's been, I don't know, I did a really interesting event with Daisy Johnson, who wrote this short story collection, The Hotel. I don't know if you're aware of it. And I think that that to me took the haunted house to this even more interesting level, because a hotel is this transient space where people are coming into it. And yeah, it's both this very personal space when you're in it that's there, but also it's not yours at all. And the idea of that having its own histories is really interesting to me. I'm also really interested in Alison Rumfitt's Tell Me I'm Worthless has really good haunted house. And this idea of, I guess, the house is something that doesn't have generally a whole lot of agency in itself, and it persists through time in a way, in a time scale that is generally longer than humans and different to humans. And I think the potential for malevolence there, I don't know, or maybe a sort of indifference maybe that creates a malevolence when something exists on a different time scale. Like, it's not necessarily out to get you, although it can be, and that's interesting. But yes, haunted houses are great.
Yeah, that's awesome. I am actually going to look into that one book you mentioned. That I'm not familiar with it, so I'm interested to read that. If you don't mind, I would like to get a little bit into Freakslaw to talk about this awesome book, listeners. If you have not picked it up, go out to your local independent bookstore and get it. You can probably find it at the library. That's where I have my copy from. Also, it's never a bad idea, listeners, to have your local library buy the book that you want to read, so then, therefore, other folks can read the books too. I'm just saying, your librarians are always looking for books to buy. Anywho, back to Freak's Law. The late '90s is the setting here, right? So I'm as a geriatric millennial, anything late '90s really resonates with me. It's before 9/11, which for me just is, I think the term that I'm hearing some of the political podcasters use is "enshittification," where everything really begins to get worse. But on this podcast, as our listeners know, we mark that with Morning in America with Ronnie Reagan in 1980. So across the pond, it would probably be the good old Iron Lady Maggie Thatcher that we can thank for all of the hellscape that we live in. But it's set in a Scottish mining town called Pitlaw. And living in Appalachia, mining towns here in the United States, I know all about these places, and these people were so relatable. So I'm curious if you want to talk a little bit about why this setting for then a book in which it's the carnival is coming to town and upsetting everything.
Yes, I would love to. I grew up in a small town in Scotland, so that is my go-to when I think of childhood times and things. But I think for this book, for a long time, when I was writing it, it took me many years to write. And for a long time, I was very clear about the fact it was a traveling fun fair, the fact that the fun fair was quite vivid to me. But I didn't really know where the fun fair was going or what the sort of force that it was coming up against was. And I've lived in Berlin for a while. And when I first moved to Berlin, I hadn't really, I think, been away from Scotland for long enough to realize what I wanted to say about it or how I wanted to write about it. So I had this sort of abortive idea for the novel where it was a fun fair, it was something, it didn't quite come. And then at some point I realized, yes, the other force is small town Scotland. And I think, I don't know, Scotland is an interesting place in this way where a lot of Scottish identity is tied up in not being English. So we are. We're not those assholes. We're good Scottish people. You brought up Margaret Thatcher. I think that's exactly a time where, a lot of her policies that she brought, she tested out the worst of them on Scottish people first to be like, okay, yeah, they can't fight back because Scotland has never majority voted Tory for a very long time and is always fuck that. But yeah, like having this idea of Scotland as an oppressed force, as this place where bad things are done to. But at the same time, Scotland has its own very terrible histories in all kinds of ways. That something the novel goes into a little bit, which I won't go fully into here, but is the witchcraft trials. And the witchcraft trials happened in the number of witches that were killed in Scotland in the Great Witchcraft Panics was multitudes higher than in England. I think something like 17 times as many witches were killed in Scotland. So there's this interesting thing where, on one hand, Scotland is this place where we feel like we're really hard done by and we've had all these terrible things. But on the other, that manifests as enacting terrible things as well, which I think is often how people and generations and trauma works in these ways. But yeah, so I find that really interesting. And in terms of timing, yeah, I mean, I'm also millennial crone, geriatric millennial, fully relate to you there. And think this time in the late 90s, it was an interesting time, right? There was a sort of a sense of hope in some ways that then all fell apart. And the summer that this is taking place was just around the time where the Labour government were about to come in the UK, the sense of hope that everything's going to change. And anyone who knows anything about Tony Blair will know that did not go a positive way. But yeah, I think there's something quite liminal about that time. And that makes for a really interesting setting for horror, I guess, or timing for horror.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the late 90s in the US is the Bill Clinton administration. I think by 97 we're definitely into the Monica Lewinsky scandal. So, imagine just the light scandal of a blowjob in the Oval Office as opposed to everything else that's happening right now in the Oval Office, if it's still oval at this point even. Good Lord. I'm really curious about small town politics that we see showing up in this town when the carnival arrives, and the insider outsider mentality that we have going on, right? Because I mean, I grew up in a small town as well. If Brian were here, he'd talk about his experience moving into this area has been really difficult because he's not from here. And when you're not from a place and you move into a place, there's some places you can eventually become part of the place, but other places really reject anyone who comes in to make them part of the place. And that is very much, at least the part of Appalachia that we're in central Pennsylvania. I get that feeling from some of the characters, some of the parents, especially in Freakslaw, where, they don't want outside influences. They don't want their kids leaving. They don't want their kids to have experiences that they didn't. And everything seems to be really a matter of re-entrenchment and conservatism, despite the fact that, as you say, the Scotland typically, never votes Tory. So there is a strange cultural conservatism, even if the politics themselves are not. And so I guess, what are you investigating here? With this sort of commentary on class and the way in which people in small towns act, and how perhaps that makes them really fertile ground for horror, perhaps?
Absolutely. I think it comes from fear, doesn't it? Already, the desire for things not to change and the desire to protect, parents protecting their children and thinking, I can create some sort of system wherein things stay the same and then they stay at least a known kind of safe. Even though, and I find that really interesting in a situation where they're we're obviously unhappy, but at least it's a known kind of unhappiness. And yeah, so I was really interested in exploring that. And also just this kind of, I think that this sort of small town Scottish idea of the valorization of suffering, this kind of Calvinist mentality that you don't complain about things, or you can complain a bit, but you don't change them. That wouldn't be on. So kind of going through something difficult and suffering through it in that way is seen as morally superior to getting out of a situation. And I think that's something that I really internalized, and probably still we'll continue the therapy to figure out how to stop doing that. But it's very ideologically deep that change, it's not only change is dangerous, but also change is somehow weak. And we don't do that. So sitting with the suffering and staying within it. And I think that's what made this a really interesting foil for the carnival coming to town, because the carnival is this force of joy for the sake of joy, designed to be around the idea of pleasure as opposed to suffering, and also disruption. I think the idea of the freak show and the carnival is how do we disrupt the normal situation of being? So yeah, as they both developed, they both were really fun to play off against each other in these different ways.
Yeah, and it's evident reading the book too. I could be tedious English professor here and bring up Macaulay Bakhtin and talk about the carnivalesque and how it is just the upsetting of everything. Or I could talk about Twelfth Night and how, I'm teaching Shakespeare right now, so I have Shakespeare on the brain. But in Twelfth Night, it's pretty much the upsetting of norms. And the characters who are part of the Freakslaw are awesome. They are so much fun. I just we get this chapter where you have Maria the fat lady and her friend Gretchen, right? Who's a drag performer. This is not a spoiler, I don't think. If it is, we'll cut it. But they're just out to lunch and they are living their best life, and they do not have any fucks to give about what the people around them think or what they say. And it's just purely joyful to see them enjoying everything about life while the people around them are just so angry. Or not everyone's angry. A few people are oh wow, they're not bothered by the fact that they are the object of attention and they seem to just be enjoying themselves. I wonder what that's like. But like, it's for them, it's joy. For the people watching them, there's like this horrific speculativeness going on. So I mean, those characters absolutely phenomenal. I'm curious, like when you're writing carnival characters, like is there research that's involved where you have to like look into actual carnivals and actual performers who were in said carnivals, or are these just completely out of Jane's head?
They're kind of a mixture. I did a degree of research of like what kind of characters, what kind of people were involved in freak shows, and yeah, what that. And then I don't know, the act of writing a book is very strange. And like, where do characters even come from? It's a teach writing as well. And I'm always trying to think about this question. And it's, yeah, there is some sort of strange alchemy and birthing that happens when a character comes. But yeah, did a lot of research. I had a formative visit to Coney Island where I saw a freak show at one point and was like, okay, there was yeah, some performer with the human werewolf with Hirschism there that I yeah, stayed with me very vividly in my mind. But I think in general what I wanted with the characters was just digging into this idea of difference being a thing to celebrate. And I think it's something that I think about a lot with queer literature, this idea that the coming out story is the most important queer story to tell, and confessing your way that you're different and trying to make heterosexual people understand what it is. And this idea that there's this, yeah, that it's like a difficult or painful thing to be queer. And that's just so alien to my experience. I'm like, no, it's great. And much, very little of life is taken up of thinking, how do I discuss this homosexuality with people and make them understand it? It's a lot more about community and joyfulness. So I wanted to think about that for other kinds of difference as well, and people celebrating these in different ways, and maybe the things that outsiders might judge you for or think like you should hide or put away, bringing that to the forefront as a thing to be celebrated. And also having these characters where like they're not able to hide this fact. Like Miss Maria is an obese woman who is very hot and enjoys her body and has a great time, but she can't walk into a room and be invisible in that. So there's an embracing of that there. I mean, it was something I thought a lot about because in terms of not disability obviously plays a role in freak shows of looking at people's bodies in this way and judging them for entertainment. And that's obviously a problematic history that freak shows have in this way. But I wanted not to erase that history, and I wanted to have these characters that had different kinds of bodies in different ways that were visible in this, and just come from that starting point of similarity for all of the freak show people, all of the Freakslaw, is this like pleasure in being who they are and the joy of that.
It's such a good foil to the town that they're visiting because they're so welcoming to everyone. It's like their community is ever growing. They're adding people along the way. Like Pin Gal, we find out she was added recently or something. Like we get her backstory, or she wasn't always part of the larger crew. And then I'm glad you brought up sort of the idea of coming out, and I like the term confessing. Like as a gay man, like you know, coming out is a constant. You're never done coming out. You're always like, there's always a new group that you have to come out to. And I think you're right that like this is a joyful thing. It's not always joyful the first few times because there's like that terror of what will happen. And speaking of horror and joy, then like, you know, the more comfortable one becomes in their own skin, the easier coming out becomes, the more that it is celebration rather than horror. And I think the characters here in Freakslaw really embody that in a really positive way. So I appreciate that. And I think we do get kind of, I mean, it's not really kind of, it is a coming out story for Derek, one of the characters in Pitlaw who ends up visiting the carnival. And like, this was such a really familiar kind of narrative, but again, joyful, where you have someone who visits the carnival and then is changed or realizes something about themselves. I'm thinking like Something Wicked This Way Comes. I'm thinking of so many other examples that one could think of with carnivals, especially. But like Derek is in a position where like his home life's not great. He goes to the carnival, and then Zed, who is just awesome, really pulls him out of his shell. So I wonder if you would be willing to talk about like why writing this coming of age coming out story for a character like Derek is something that's meaningful and that works in horror, maybe where it might not work in other genres?
Oh, that's an interesting question, thinking about why it works in horror and not in other genres. Because, yeah, when I started writing this book, it's obviously a very big ensemble cast and sprawling in all these different directions. And that was definitely a problem in earlier drafts. It's like, where is this story even going? But the relationship between Derek and Zed was something that was very clear to me in the beginning. And also the sort of additional attraction that that Derek has initially to Ruth as well, and this sort of, yeah, I don't know, messy teenage queerness and all of the directions that it goes in. And I think one of the things I really wanted to explore was something about masculinity and boys who are brought up in a certain kind of way, because it was also very much the case. Like when I was at school, if you were a girl who kissed other girls, that was fine and wasn't really gay. It was just, I don't know, entertaining. But if you were a boy who kissed other boys, that was definitely gay, and that was, will get you beaten up or whatever. And there's obviously a lot of problematic reasons for this based on what, you know, desire is allowed to be and whether attraction to women is not real, and bisexuality in general is pick a side with all, whereas that's not part of it. It's like the no picking of sides. So I think I was really interested in letting Derek be able to be this kind of messy character who explores things in different ways and follows attractions in this, but also has this attraction to Zed, who gets to be not this complicated character. Like, I really love Zed as just this force of joyful, eruption and opening up in these ways. But wanting to follow how it's not always, even in that situation where someone makes it very obvious to you that they like you and the possibilities are there, the complications in dealing with that in yourself as well. And also going on rides. I really wanted to write scenes of going on rides, being excited about it, and then the problems of that too.
Yeah, and since you brought it up, I'm going to ask about Ruth. So the other sort of horror that I really get as someone who is from a small town and somehow has ended up back in it, listeners are familiar with this. I think I mentioned it to you before we started recording. There's something about the cyclical horror of class, or of like the class into which one is born. And Ruth McNamara seems to be struggling to get out. And I'm not going to spoil what actually happens, but there are so many chapters spent with her figuring out, how the hell am I going to get out of this place? I just want to get out of this place. And the carnival presents to her an opportunity to get out of the place, if not physically, at least mentally, at least ideologically. And so I'm curious with Ruth. I don't want to spoil it, so I'm not going to ask the question. I was just going to ask there to do Jerry Seinfeld. What's the deal with Ruth? No. So talk to me about class and horror and the cycles of class horror with Ruth, if you don't mind.
I mean, I think class makes everything more complicated in these ways and gives some people opportunities to break out of a situation and other people staying mired in it. I mean, I think Ruth in the novel has more opportunities than Derek to escape, definitely, is from a higher class background in that way. And so for her, it's very this idea of the possibility is there to get out of this situation, but also there are things operating against her at the same time. And I think one of the things I was really interested in exploring with her was this idea of being someone with a really certain plan of what they think their future should look like and how they ought to behave. And this idea that if you just do everything right and you're good in certain kinds of ways and you do the things you're told and go towards the thing that you have planned and you make a plan and you follow it through, that will work out for you in a certain kind of way and that will allow you out. But obviously that in itself is a very privileged way of thinking, and only people get to have the belief that if I do things right, I get out. Other people learn the lesson that it doesn't matter what you do, the system is stacked against you. And I think Ruth sits in a sort of hinge point between two bits of that. There is the possibility for her, but also there is a lot of risk for her. And I like this idea with her that a lot of the ways that she thinks will offer her some kind of freedom or get her to a better place are also miring her deeper in situations too.
Yeah, that's great. And I want to like kudos to you because I think we get some, even though they're not huge characters in the novel, the parents of Ruth and the parents of Derek are really well fleshed out in ways that are, it's sort of achingly painful to sit with Derek's mom. And Derek's dad's kind of a jackass, but like understandably so in some ways. He is just the embodiment of toxic masculinity that exists in the working class. Ruth's parents are kind of the reverse, where her mom is kind of this antagonistic woman towards her, whereas her father just seems like this poor man who is just so tired and has just been like beaten down by the world. And that's something that I think, unfortunately, for all of us living in 2026 or in this hellscape that we're all in, the dark times, as we've said on other episodes of the podcast, is relatable for a lot of folks. And they're trying to do their best, but there's just only so many things they can do in a system that's stacked against them. So thank you. Like I think it's important to have characters who are fleshed out in this way, even when they are small bits. There's so many more things I want to ask about with the book, namely worms and worm summoning, because I taught an article about worm summoning in the Panhandle of Florida. Totally different, but maybe we'll save that for another time. And I wonder if we might get a bit of a tease for Welcome to the Chaos Conf.
Yes, although please send me the article about worm charming because worm charming is amazing. Like, what a fascinating thing for people to do. But yeah, so my new novel is called Welcome to the Chaos Camp, and it's coming out with Penguin with Doubleday again in May 14th. The story is about, I feel like I haven't gone through this pitch as many times as with Freakslaw, so I'm gonna really get down my how do I talk about this. The story is about a Scottish woman who is living in New Orleans, working as a tour guide there, and she's kind of in a stable, settled marriage that has a bunch of different problems, and shit is starting to get weird. Shit is getting weird climate-wise. Her old boxing scar starts reopening, and it seems things are on the cusp of something strange. And then she meets a group of degenerate filmmakers, kind of John Waters-esque characters who tempt her into a world of arson and debauchery and basically invite her to join their cult. Or is it a cult? Or is it just a really great organization of people doing the right thing? Who can tell? But yeah, she moves to Mexico with them and weird shit happens. I won't spoil her too much after that. But yeah, I think one of the things I really wanted to do with this book was, I think Freakslaw is a lot about this idea of escape. And we talked about this with Ruth and like getting away from our past and running away with the funfair type idea, escaping in that way. And one of the things I really thought a lot about after that is you can break down the old systems and you can fight against them. But after that, you need to build something new and you need to have something to come in and replace it. And how do we build new systems without replicating the same bullshit that we came from? How do we have like non-hierarchical organizations without accidentally forming cults all of the time? Yeah, I spent quite a lot of time in leftist circles and non-hierarchical groups trying to make good change. And ideologically, I think it's wonderful, but I also think it's hard not to get in certain patterns. And I think cults are fascinating. So yeah, that's what's going on there.
I'm really looking forward to that, mostly because I love New Orleans. It's a wonderful city, and so getting to revisit any sort of shenanigans that might begin in New Orleans sounds really phenomenal. And of course, a cult would start in New Orleans because it's New Orleans. Like there's just like there are no rules in New Orleans. It is the upside down. It is itself kind of a carnival. So that sounds really wonderful. I guess finally, thank you for all of your time today. But our final question for our creators is always: is there anything in horror right now that is bringing you joy?
My recommendations are probably books because that's where my brain always goes to first. I can recommend Michaela Clements and Anjuli Datta's novel, Feast While You Can. I don't know if you're aware of this, but like also a small town horror, small town lesbians, possession, a weird cave, excellent dyke writing in it, excellent creepiness, and oh, it's so good. So I think that's absolutely wonderful. I also recently, or a little while ago, read Heather Parry's novel Carrion Crow, which is a woman locked in the attic by her mother, and yeah, involves crows, is twisted and dark, and maybe just one of the most disgusting books I've ever read. Really good at visceral body disgustingness. And yeah, when I was thinking of this, I realized I haven't been watching enough horror movies recently, and I will be rectifying that. But the last one I did watch was that I really loved was Saint Maud. I guess religious horror and caretaker horror. And yeah, this woman working as a palliative care nurse who undergoes religious conversion, and it has some also horrific body things which I really enjoy, but it also had just yeah, the horrors around caretaking in a certain kind of way. And yeah, I think she's amazing. The director is amazing, and I love that film so much.
Yeah, we've done an episode on Saint Maud, and it's so good. It's so good. I remember when we talked about it, we're watching it, and I'm like, this looks so familiar, and I was like, oh god, many parts of it were shot in Scarborough, and I'd just been to Scarborough a couple summers ago I was in the UK for a conference, and I decided to take a train because you all have working rail, which is lovely because it's not a thing in the United States. We have all these railroad tracks don't get used for anything other than train accidents, really, which is not joyful. So I'm going to turn away from that. But yeah, Saint Maud's an amazing film, amazing body horror. As someone who works in medieval drama, that's my PhD, like this type of stuff. I'm thinking of like Marjorie Kemp and all these other fun female mystics who went through body horror. And Saint Maud is a very good modern representation of that, and why, in some ways, like what she's doing, I don't know, like might not have seemed as weird then to folks as it does now. And that's maybe some temporal horror too. So all sorts of horror going on here. Yeah, but thank you. That's always an excellent recommendation. I'm looking forward to checking out the books you're recommending too. So I've added those to a list. Jane, can't thank you enough for joining me today. Listeners, make sure that if you have not read Freakslaw, that you go out and find it. You will not be sorry. It's an excellent book, and I really look forward to Welcome to the Chaos Conf coming out on May 14th, which is my birthday. I'm super excited for that. So, Jane, thanks for joining us. Listeners, remember to seek joy, even in horror.
This has been an episode of Horror Joy, produced in conjunction with Axis Mundi Media. Thanks for joining us. We want to hear from you. You can find us at Horror Joy Pod on Instagram or at Horror Joy Pod on YouTube. You can also email us at horrorjoypod@gmail.com, all one word. And you can, of course, find us wherever you get your podcasts. Give us a like, subscribe, leave a review. Until next time, remember, seek joy, even in horror.